Okay, everybody, we are recording. This is David P. France, and I'm coming to you from Basel, Switzerland. And before we get started with this conversation, I want to make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and share the video with your friends and your family. We're doing some great interviews here with people that I believe they've already made their mark, but in this particular time that we're living in, what they know and their knowledge is gonna be useful to so many people. So with that, I'm going to welcome someone that I've known, for, I don't know, maybe 7 years now?
That sounds right.
7 years, yeah. Robby Rao. How you doing, Robby?
Doing great, David.
I'm doing great. He's doing great. So let me read you the bio. This is straight off of what's a little bit of edits from his book called Emotional Business, right? So you can see it right here. See at least the title. So Robby Rao is a sought-after speaker and management consultant to businesses on 5 continents, an expert in the scientific underpinnings of emotion and the business applications of emotion. Robby possesses a diverse background as a neurosurgeon in training and child development researcher. He is a graduate of Johns Hopkins University and received his surgical training at Harvard. He currently lives in Los Angeles. How's that?
Sometimes I'm like, wait, who are they talking about? Oh, great.
Look, well, we're going to jump right into it because there's a lot that we want to cover very quickly, right? Tell the people, tell our audience what that means, what does that mean? The people that are in the medical field may know, but people that are sort of everyday people, explain what that means to them, what it should mean to them.
This is easier to explain now these days because everybody has watched Grey's Anatomy and all these TV medical shows. But I, in my 20s, went down the route of saying, I'll become a doctor. And yet, on the inside, I was never really quite 100% bought into it. It seemed like a good choice, seemed safe, seemed logical, seemed like something I could do. So I went down the path. After finishing college, enrolled in medical school, had a great opportunity to learn from amazing teachers, and then started residency. So have an MD and doing, the work of an intern. So seeing patients, writing notes and charts. But at some point early in the process, those doubts about whether I was in the right place really popped open. So that was actually 20 years ago now for me. It was the 90s where I was in training and in Baltimore and in Boston. And then one day I realized this is not my path. This isn't my future. So I, quite unexpectedly, to everyone's great shock, quite frankly, I walked into my department chairman's office and said, here's my pager, here's my ID tag. And it's time for me to go.
I'll ask you a question like this. Did this come very easily? Was this easy for you, this process, in terms of the actual learning?
Yeah. I knew that taking care of patients was not what I could be or should be doing. But much of the training requirement, can you memorize this? Can you solve these chemistry problems? Can you learn how to tie knots with your hands, in complex dexterity type ways? Those things came easier for me than others. Not that I was some kind of instant boy genius who could do anything. No, I found a lot of it hard, like anyone would. But it was easy enough that I kept at it. It would have been easier in a way if the life had just crushed it out of me, like, this isn't for you, you fail, And to some degree, because I was succeeding in other people's eyes, I said, well, I should stay here. And then it was not until I sort of really embraced, wait, who am I? And that came later, that I finally said, I can help people in a much different way, which I think is really my path.
And so, of course, it was a surprise in the way because they didn't expect you to walk in and say what you said, right? Because in their mind, you were doing well.
Yeah, I fit into people's expectations of me.
Mm-hmm.
And because I checked those boxes and let people say, oh yeah, we know him, we like him, he's this. It did come as a shock. To some degree, I have a personality type, which is consistent with a lot of people in healthcare, which is I sort of have a duck on the pond type personality. If you just look at me, you'll be like, oh, he's calm as can be. He's just floating on the water. But underneath, those paddles are going, and that was me. On the outside, looked like everything was perfect, but on the inside, things were not right.
So you talked, or you just mentioned expectations, right? So can you elaborate with regard to how your family, how your friends took this, what seemed to be a sudden turn
Yeah.
and plans?
So I had gone to elementary school and high school in the Chicago area. I was your typical traditional Midwestern clean-cut kid. Yes, I had brown skin. Back then I had regular hair, not purple and blue hair, but I was, kind of very much a prototypical kid from the Midwest. My parents had invested heavily in my elementary and high school education in that I went to parochial schools. I went to Catholic schools over the years. So taught from nuns and priests and, learning to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, kind of thing. And, doing well. And people, and what's funny is if you're in elementary school in the Midwest and you're in a Catholic school and you start to show some promise, they instantly have your life written for you. Oh, Robbie, you're going to go to Notre Dame and then you're going to be a priest, or you're going to go somewhere and be a doctor. It was kind of like very quickly on, people start seeing potential in you and they want to see the best for you. It's all with the best of intention. But it then starts to feel like, well, what if I just want to do something else? People would be like, oh, that would be a waste. So, they would be like, oh, don't do something easy because other people can do that. You've got to try for more. I'm like, but I'm not saying I want to do something easy. I just want to do something different. I want to make my mark in a different way. And my parents are immigrants, and immigrant families tend to have parents who say, don't be too risky. We took a huge risk just coming to the United States in the 60s or 70s or 80s, as many immigrants came. The last thing we want you to do is to do something unpredictable or, less than safe or, kind of highly volatile, like entertainment. We want you to be like solid, traditional type thing. And I, in a way I am an actor. I've always been, in the sense that I'm like, well, what does my audience need right now? Oh, my audience needs to see me as a doctor. I will be a doctor. Unfortunately, that role lasted for 9 years of medical school training and everything. But the that kind of fitting in with what other people needed me to be was, at least early on, was a big part of my identity. If you were to ask me at 22 or 25, who are you? I'm like, well, I'm the son of so-and-so. I'm a student of so-and-so. And everything of my identity was in relation to somebody else. And I had not yet come back to say, well, who am I? Forget everybody else. That came much, much later.
Well, you're saying this, and I'm grinning and grimacing at the same time. I'm wondering why that might be the case. But let's say, this is a theme that is, can I say consistent? I think it's a theme that is the norm for most people.
Yeah. You don't have to be a child of immigrants in the Midwest in the 80s to know what it's like to have other people's expectations on you. Everybody has expectations on them. Some coming from their family or their siblings or their parents. Some are coming from teachers. Unfortunately, like, look, I got the best of expectations thrown at me, meaning we expect you to do well. We expect you to be successful. We expect you to make us proud, whether that's parents, teachers, whatever. What a burden it is to be in a situation where others expect nothing of you, and then when you try to achieve or succeed, you can be sort of questioned or doubted, like, you know? So that is a much harder and worse burden. And, to some degree, everybody has something like that. Everybody has those doubters around them, whether they're even sometimes families or friends.
And so once you made the decision, you walk into the office of this administrator, right?
Yeah.
And you say, okay, here's my badge, or this is it. I mean, what happened after that? I mean, you walked out and then went home, and then said, okay, now is going to be the rest of my life the way I want it, or, it wasn't that easy, or?
Well, I'm saying it in this kind of dramatic way, like, and I walked out. But, the reality was you would really leave people in a very bad situation, because there are not like hundreds of extra residents walking around that can pick up the workload. So really what I did was I came in and I expressed that I would be leaving and I would stay as long as the department needed me to kind of not disrupt the operations of the department. Because suddenly when you lose one, even junior level physician, it can throw things like on-call schedules and everything into chaos. So I stayed a number of months after announcing my intention to leave. And then there was a day, though, in April of 2000 where I came in and just turned in the badge in the paper. It wasn't as kind of like I can't work here and walk out, but it tells the story better. But the reality was I tried to do it in the most responsible way possible, and I exited, and people were surprised. People were not expecting it. But once I then talked to people, the other nurses and physicians that I was training with and learning from, I think they all understood. And, I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. Series of coincidental meeting this person, talking to this person, learning from this person. Another opportunity came to do some healthcare related consulting work. So I went to a large consulting firm and joined that. And then I started to say, like, I understand why these organizations need kind of analytical, data-driven consulting analysis. Useful, important, will help the organizations. But I kept noticing that the issues that the companies were having, they were technical and analytical and data issues, but they were really those were kind of like the superficial problems. The deeper problems were people did not understand how to relate to each other. People didn't trust each other enough to share information. People questioned motives all the time. There was lack of coordination because of a lack of leadership. And these more behavioral, emotional things came to really, in my mind, say, this is the real issue. I was having a kind of what I thought was just a regular day-to-day small talk type conversation. And one of these business people said, I wish we used our heart around here more. I go, what? And he explained, I wish we cared about people and, and showed care for people and took care of them as part of our business mission. And I was like, oh, okay. And I sort of chuckled. He goes, I'm not being funny. I'm like, I know. I just think it's funny that you say that happens in the heart. That doesn't happen in the heart. The heart is a pump that gets blood to organs. But care and empathy and understanding how one human's experience relates to another, those don't happen in the chest. They happen in the brain. And because of my medical training, I could talk in some great detail about that part of it. And the business person I was speaking to, he said, I want you to come do a talk on Thursday lunch for my team about that. And that was like in 2004. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing it ever since.
So wait a minute. Why do people think it's coming from the heart versus the head? I mean, is there any, people feel that, right? I mean, that's what
Yeah.
They're sensing.
Well,
Why is that?
yeah. I mean, it's one of those kind of interesting historical stories. You could write a whole book just on the history of how the word heart came to be associated with emotion. Part of it is there are some spiritual and cultural traditions in different cultures that believe that emotions happen in the heart. We even see in some Indian traditional belief systems that there's a heart chakra, right? And there are other cultures that have a strong belief in the heart, corazón in Espanol. And we, re-emphasize that perspective about the emotions being centered in the heart in our music and lyrics and poetry, right? Oh, when you left me, you broke my heart. Or, oh, he has such a good heart. So we reinforce this idea. And, if the intent is to say there are good emotional abilities and empathy in the person, I don't really care from a poetic standpoint where people want to name it to. But the reality of the science of it and trying to understand how and why it happens, you can do chest x-rays all day long. You won't understand how somebody's emotions happen. But if somebody has something show up on their brain MRI in particular areas, then we understand more about where emotion is getting processed and happening. And we know now that that's in places like the inferior frontal cortex just behind the eyeballs. We know that happens in the temporal lobe just above the ear, about 1 centimeter or 2 within the skull. And it happens in the cingula gyrus that divides the right versus left hemispheres. And there's a bunch of other areas, the mirror neurons in the frontal lobe. I mean, we could just go on and on about the neuroscience lecture of it all. But when these areas get damaged, people's emotions change. After a heart attack, people don't change the way they feel about things. They still experience the full range of emotions. But a brain tumor, brain injury, a stroke, often family and friends will say they're not the same person. And so that to me also gave me a second message of hope, which is to say, if these are areas in the brain that are responsible for the emotions, then they can learn. That's the one thing about the brain is it's so adaptive. It's so constantly rewriting itself and rewiring itself that if you can show people different ways of being emotional to each other, not just through PowerPoint slides, okay, here's my next slide on emotion, that doesn't do anything. But if you can give people emotional experiences, immersive experiences where they actually have to do something emotional together, and I use things from the theater, frankly, to do that. I do a lot of kind of theater-based things about movement and interacting with people to learn and to get those areas of the brain more developed. And over the years, like I said, 15, 16 years now of doing it, people talk about it as really the key to long-term changing of their organization towards success. They could have rewritten the policies, they could have rewritten the standard operating procedures, they could reorganize the org chart. They never really saw that much improvement. It still, quote unquote, sucked to be there. And then I said, well, why is that? And people didn't say like, oh, our IT systems are old. Sometimes they'd mention that, but usually they said, this place, ugh, and they would just sigh, and you would be like, well, what does that mean? And as you dug into it, it was about the way that humans treat each other. And ultimately then what I, through a process of experience and discovery and learning on my own, just from watching, was to realize we can change that. We can fundamentally change that by knowing what we know about the brain and then creating the right circumstances for at the individual level transformation to occur, so the business at a group level, at an enterprise level, transformation can occur.
So I'll ask you, on your first, when this colleague or this business associate asked you to do this first lecture, what kinds of things did you talk about, and what was the response? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I actually very clearly remember the room where I had to do it in, and I remember each of the people sitting in the room there. It was a management group, a group of managers, I should say. It wasn't the top executives. It was a kind of mid-level managers group. And I think the reaction at the beginning was like, what the heck is this? We're expecting a seminar talk. Why are we standing up? And then when we started to do some of the theater-based things that I had been so drawn to throughout my life, as a means of showing these principles and allowing these people to change the way they just interacted on small things, then they were a little freaked out by it. Just as a simple example of something that happened in that seminar, very specific. I asked them to do something very simple. Turn to the person next to you, shake their hand and say, hello, my name is. I know you know each other, but just go ahead and introduce yourself. And I'm going to ask you, make eye contact when you do it. And this was far before coronavirus prevented handshakes and everything. But they shook their hand and said, make eye contact. And then they did. And then I said, okay, now look up at me. And then they all looked at me and I said, what color are the other person's eyes? And people were like, I don't know. Didn't you make eye contact? Yeah. You didn't notice the color of the person's eyes? No. Do it again. So then they turned to each other and I told them this time, do not break that eye contact until you can tell me what color their eyes are. And person after person told me that they started to do that afterwards and started to get feedback like, you're such a good listener. You're so in the moment. You're so present. And they were like hearing and getting this kind of feedback from their colleagues and customers and other people on their teams that they were interacting with. Just that one small, simple thing, when you make eye contact, notice the eye color. It's a different way of, if you will, being in the world. Just those simple, small things. And when you put together that with a list of other ways of interacting, behaving, responding, trusting, leading, it changes people. And so I sort of accidentally came upon it from all those years of medical training, which I thought I would never use. But it actually helped for me to understand, okay, so that's why it's happening. And then the chance to be a business consultant for a couple of years doing like number crunching stuff, but recognizing numbers only told you so much, you still had to understand. And you could make it quantitative. You could say, okay, 43% of the people show this behavior or 77% of the people have this mindset. And I'll do some of that now and then. But fundamentally, what I've come to do and come to believe in is like what the world needs is just more connection. And that means having people feel safe around each other.
Now, why do you think it is, how would I put this? Why do you think people in business focus on the analytical or the numbers as the determinative factor when it comes to business? Besides the normal, okay, profit, loss.
Yeah.
But there's something else going on, I suspect, right?
Yeah, this is a pendulum thing over many, many, many years, not just 2 or 5 or 8 years. Some people will be like, oh, it's just because of artificial intelligence. It's not just because of artificial intelligence. It goes way, way back. In my perspective, when I talk about this, tend to say that this dehumanization of people in a workplace, you could argue it's always been there, and some people would certainly argue that, particularly in the terms of exclusion of women, exclusion of underrepresented groups. But what I really think changed it was the industrialization in the mid-1800s, because you go from a period where every product, every service has someone's name attached to it. You're in a small village, there's a village cobbler who makes the shoes, a village baker who makes the bread, and everybody knows who that is. Oh, that's Henry. Oh, that's Joanne's Bakery. I mean, I don't think there were that many female bakers in the 1820s, but there may have been some. But in that time period, we go from having a personal connection to people and the work that they do to an industrial process far more capable of feeding the world, producing goods and items. So we could clearly argue a huge part of progress, but it didn't come without a cost. And the cost it came with was we created this mechanized world able to do vast amounts of agricultural machinery, all kinds of other productions. But what we sacrificed was connection to each other. And in fact, the machine became so important by the mid-1800s that we even start to see people become more like secondary to the machines. That, of course, we need to hire workers, but the workers aren't the key. It's the machine that's the key. And then by the 1900s, you start to see, early 1900s, you start to see terminology even change about how we have to manage and monitor human workforce items, how we manage the behavior and activities of others. And it becomes secondary to the machine. What do machines need to run? They need energy. They need resources. What about the people? Well, they are human resources to feed the machine. And with that kind of approach, it has turned people then also to say, as a manager, you don't want any connection with your people. You just want to manage the numbers. You want to just kind of get your targets and hit your targets. And, you know, if you want, you could suggest, okay, in our business, we're going to be a zero emotion business, all analytical, all numbers. And I'm going to say, well, are you going to have humans around? And if the person says, well, of course we're going to have humans around, then you're not going to be able to get to a zero emotion environment. Because if you have humans, you have emotions. And again, why is that? It's not because of a failure of humans. It's because that's what the brain does. We think the brain is like this cognitive thinking computer. There is a lot of that. We have cognitive capabilities. We can invent and create. Those are all great things that the brain does. But the brain also allows us to understand each other. You could argue that there's more of the brain devoted to awareness of others through sensory systems, through empathy, areas of the brain like in the temporal lobe. You know, that amount of area makes the brain the center of emotion, not only the center of thinking. This is kind of a side thing, but there's a philosopher from the 1800s, René Descartes. One of Descartes' famous phrases is, I think, therefore I am. The kind of philosopher's point of view to say like intelligence and self-awareness makes us human. I think that's partly right, but I would amend it because of what we know about the brain to actually say, we feel, therefore we are, in the plural, together. And it's only when we try to get away from that and just make everything numbers, 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 hit your targets, shut up and get back to work, that businesses run into problems. You can do that in short bursts. You can do that in a crisis when things have to get done by tomorrow because there's an urgent need. You can do that, and I think people adapt to that. But when that's all work is in place, you just show up, put your head down, never smile, just be analytical all day long, show the next PowerPoint. It's very hard to sustain that. And good people leave those environments for better environments, and the people left behind just have to suffer through it. So it ends up ultimately costing the business to have that kind of situation.
And so let's say as you are moving through this now created world of business consulting, right? And you're getting more and more assignments, right? And you usually probably, what my guess is that you're getting them through word of mouth, right?
Word of mouth, there are a number of situations where a new client has come to me because I worked with an organization, we made a profound change, and then somebody left for whatever reason and went to a new company. And then when they got there, they're like, we have to bring this guy in. So that has been kind of very humbling and also gratifying that that's happened. The other place that people find me is that I speak at conferences. So I'll get up and do a workshop for a short period, maybe 20 minutes, or maybe a longer kind of breakout group for 90 minutes. And people, even in that short of a span, can walk away feeling like, I'm going to look at things differently. And from there, they want more because there is kind of a human hunger for this.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to not break, but I'm going to be more specific. Now, when I met you, this was at in Switzerland and one of the pharmaceutical companies, and I knew immediately, based on, I don't know who somebody brought me to you, I think, or to something that you were doing. And I knew immediately, I was like, oh, this guy's, he's on it. I was like, this guy knows. Like, and it's interesting because I felt like I was one of the few people that did, you know, and when you were talking, it was like I was right there with you the whole time, understood it from top to bottom, side to side. And I knew at that point my role was just to kind of say, yeah, yeah, everything that you would say. I was like, you know, or just as a support, because I knew there was going to be in the room during these workshops and exercises and things in the company that there would be people that were not comfortable, right? There would be discomfort. So I said, okay, Dave, you just act like everything is fine, right? And then as they look at you, they know, maybe a little bit more, right? How that it's normal, right? But I'm sure that you got a lot of people that were not in that space when you're giving this kind of information. Can you give us an example of something that you presented that didn't necessarily go as expected in terms of comfort level and what you
Sure.
did try to?
Yeah, there are different reasons why a group of people struggle. And if I misjudge what that reason is, I may not end up saying, and something as small as one word wrong can turn things sour. The specific example I'm thinking about is for a company I worked with about 3 years ago now. And in that company, I had been asked to come in by kind of a pretty senior person, not the CEO, but a pretty senior person, to talk about how emotions related to customer experience, because they had gotten some difficult feedback from customers such that they thought they really need to do a deeper dive on it. And when I came in and I started to look around, I could say, yeah, there's some real challenges here on the customer experience side. And I thought, I met some nice people. They seemed very well-intended. They seemed very motivated to want to serve customers well. So I began really to only focus, because of the nature of what the scope had been identified as when I came in, I was talking mostly about the customers. And it seemed to be going fine in these small little group workshops I was doing with just a handful of people at a time in just one of their locations in one of their offices. And then there was one gentleman, kind of slightly older, in his early 60s. And he just stood up and said, I'm gone. I'm out of here. And I was really like taken aback, like, wait, don't go. What are you saying? Did I say something wrong? He goes, you're saying the same thing that all those leaders of ours have said. And I go, what is the issue? And he's like, you tell us to be kind to the customers. Nobody is being kind to us. And, I had heard this before and felt this before, but, in that moment, I really realized for that organization, it was actually going to just sort of be hollow nonsense that people would have rolled their eyes at if we only talked about the customer's experience and what we do to influence it. Sometimes if it's really like, hey, we were really good on the technical side with the app and all that, but we didn't really do well with the people side, then you can sort of focus only on the customer because everybody's otherwise doing fine. But in that situation, there had been a long history, a long culture of problems with it. So when I started to talk about those things, it was a problem. And I immediately did a course correction. I immediately then, with the very next seminar, started talking only about the experiences of the employees, with a mindset of saying, if we change the employee experience, then that will inevitably improve the customer experience. Sure. So then we did that, and it was it actually was a pretty large number. We ended up doing seminars in a bunch of their locations, a bunch of their stores, and it ended up being, I want to say, 2,500 people who sat in small rooms with 5 other people at a time, 10 other people at a time, and talked about what it meant emotionally to connect to other employees and how managers created part of that culture, how the executives created part of that culture. But all together, they did a massive change. And the one thing that I'll say is, in their industry, they went from really struggling to being among the top of their industry on a lot of things, financial metrics, share price, as well as outside awards for customer experience.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you something else. Let's say now that the book, I've shown the book in the beginning of the video, Emotional Business, the subtitle, isn't that right? The subtitle, Inspiring Human Connectedness to Grow Earnings in the Economy, right? So we mentioned in the beginning that this kind of information is probably very helpful, specifically now, right? Even more so now. How would somebody even approach that, a business person? How would they even begin to approach that subtitle? I mean, you don't have to give everything away for free, right? You can give me some, don't give them everything, right? But like maybe some strategies. I remember going through the book and seeing there were some strategies. You can give us a couple of strategies in terms of how to do this.
You know, the primary one that I think is the most important is just to define what is it that we do for our people in our culture, in our organization. So if you say like, oh, we provide very good incentives and very good compensation packages, that's not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. And in the book, I list that there are 9 human emotional needs. And an organization can't be responsible for taking care of all 9. Then all you would do is take care of people's emotional needs and never run the business. But you can define for our people in our environment, what's our strategy? What's our emotional, cultural goal? And so those 9 include praise, peace, or creating a harmonious environment where there isn't conflict all the time, nurturing people for growth, imagination and letting people think big and dream big, inclusion of all, so everyone's voice matters, inspiration, doing great, noble work for the world, gratitude and a statement of gratitude between people to allow them to know that they are appreciated, fun, actually having laughter in the workplace, and friendship, having social bonds that extend beyond the workplace into home life, such as, hey, how is your mother doing? These 9 factors come together to form an emotional culture. So if you're sitting there saying, I don't know what to do with the COVID thing now, the things we used to do, like we used to have an office party, or we used to have tickets to the basketball games, or we used to, have a happy hour or something like that now and then, or we used to have a monthly lunch with the executives. We don't have any of those things now because everybody's at home. True, it is hard to maintain those older traditional type ways of connection and allowing people to feel appreciated. So you have to challenge yourself, and everybody's doing it slightly differently. I don't think there's an exact right answer because it depends a little bit on your organization, its history, and the people involved. But you've got to figure out how can you deliver those 9 or some portion of those 9 to people when they are physically separated and only working remotely from their homes. You can still deliver gratitude as a manager to a group and individually as well. You can still create a sense of imagination and dreaming big, even if we're not all sitting in the same conference room when it happens. There are ways to push the emotional experience that goes along with the work experience to keep people engaged, to keep people feeling like they're moving towards something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Would you say that some people may not have these skills? Can these skills be learned? Or, I mean, there's an argument that, the types of people that are attracted or come into an organization are a specific type. And these types of people don't mirror what you've just presented. The culture is such, or the environment that is such, that the last ones standing tend to be those that don't have the skill set that you just laid out in the strategy.
Historically, that's certainly been true, particularly in environments where there is no transparency into the company from the outside. Mm-hmm. That is, when customers don't really know anything about the inner workings of the company, and the products are pretty traditional, mature markets where there is no innovation happening, where there is no experience component to the customer. They just want their thing at the cheapest price and that's all they need. Yeah, that's true. We tend to hire people where their emotional skill sets may be less than some of their others. But in any industry that has actual customer interaction, has actual talent that has to be grown, developed, and utilized to create innovation, to create exceptional service, it's very hard to get those done if the managers and management are lacking in emotional skills. So it's true that there are some places where those things are still the legacy, they're still there. But I've actually been hard pressed, even when I go to a big conference, I don't expect everybody in the room to agree with 100% of what I said. But very often, the least likely people that you would expect, the CFO of some old industrial type business, comes up to me and says, this is so what's needed. And that's the CFO of an old industrial company who's saying something like that. So when that kind of feedback happens, you know that it's hitting something in need. So the part about whether people can be changed, I probably 15 years ago would have said like, I don't think you can change people. I think you can improve, but I don't think you can fundamentally change people. And then I have to tell you over and over again, once you unlock the idea that people can succeed by caring for each other, as opposed to kind of beating them down in a strict fashion with punishments, people actually do make remarkable individual transformations. I cannot tell you the number of times where I've been in an organization for a couple of months and somebody comes up to me and says, what did you do to Bob? I'm like, what do you mean? I didn't do anything to Bob. No, Bob's different. Bob's different. And I'm like, in what way? Nobody liked Bob before. Now, like, I actually saw Bob crack a joke. I'm like, and how's Bob's unit doing? Better than ever. So there are those kinds of things. And then I get the occasional person who comes up and actually says, you know, again, this isn't me. This is them making their own changes, their own transformations. But then people will come up and say, like, you know, since I went to that seminar, my wife tells me I'm different.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I can attest. Like, I mean, it's in some ways, how can I say this? Because of my background as a dancer, but I would even say in the world of dance, the way that I think is very different than even the dancers, right? So I approach choreography in a way that I don't do choreography on people that I don't know their bodies or their movement first. When we learn integratively the choreography. So it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, you are going to get this part and you have to learn this part and I'm going to tell you what you need to know now. What you learn is made up in relationship to whoever else is in the room. So we build the choreography around the people's ability and their emotional, their ability to move through the space with emotion. Yeah, so it is, I think, a technique that isn't necessarily employed by a lot of people, even in the in the dance world, the arts world. It's still one of rigid. Let's say I'm making the assumption in terms of the ballet world, rigidity and learning in a certain way. And if you think about ballet in terms of there's the core and then there's the lead and that sort of thing, I would be teaching them so that any one of them could do the lead. The choreography would evolve in that way. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to happen, but I don't want one person to only know their part.
Sure.
It's like when that cue changes, you all should know that so-and-so is about to come out. Everybody, should know, not just the person doing the part. Right. So it's interesting that and I understand where you're coming from completely. Is there anything else that we should glean specifically with regard to these times that we're living in now? and what you do with companies?
Okay, this is going to strike some people as very hard to hear. But I'm going to say that the way we keep using the word diversity needs to change. When we mean diversity today in 2020, what that typically means is we want different people on a demographic level. We want people of color. We want more women leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And so that I might call is like a first layer of diversification, a first layer of being more inclusive. But what I keep seeing and hearing is people will be like, okay, we need to have more people so it looks more like the world. But then the people they are comfortable with sound the same as everybody else, comes up with the same ideas as everybody else. In a way, what they're saying is, we'll take exterior diversity, we won't take interior diversity. People who think differently, people who create in totally different ways, people who see the world differently. That's a harder leap that we still are trying to do. And that's going to influence everything. Because the real challenge is not to say, let's make the exteriors diverse. That's hard enough. But the real challenge is going to be, I think, particularly for companies that need to be agile and survive as times continue to be stressful and change, is how do we become diverse on people's minds, their beliefs, their ways of having their own identity. Part of the reason I have blue and purple hair is that I kept encountering people making immediate judgments back to our earlier part of the conversation about my identity. People would be like, oh, he's this ethnic group, he's this age, therefore we know everything about him. And I would say, actually, I'm a creative person who mostly works with creative industries and creative types of people. And people would be like, you? And I said, yeah, me. And they're like, oh, you don't look creative. I was like, what does it mean to look creative? And they're like, you just kind of like, you look like a middle-aged Asian guy. And I'm like, huh. And I'd always been fascinated with different styles and different people's fashion and clothing and look choices. And I live in LA, and I was one day going down Melrose, and I said, I'm going to do something funny with my hair. And I went in and talked to a hairstylist, and she was like, I think you can go purple. With your skin color, I think you can go purple. So next thing I know, I had purple for a while. Now I'm doing the two-tone blue and purple thing, and gray still pops up through both the blue and the purple, but that's me. Because at least now it sort of tells people, when you look at me, something is not going to meet your preconceived notions. There is something different enough.
Yeah, it's a serious thing, right? I mean, it happens to a lot of us. And I'll say this, and I want to leave with this and get your impression. It seems with the recent political unrest that we can at least say that those people in the street, they are saying, not just saying, they're more, this is what I believe, they're more aligned with what you just said about diversity, and they're actually living it. But I would say they don't necessarily have the accoutrement of the hair, right? They are, because when you look at the people out in the street, they look like regular people. It's not all one demographic, right?
True.
There are lawyers. I think there was a lawyer that got arrested, somebody who had like a privileged background, couple of lawyers that were with prominent firms out in the street. And I thought, this is the beginning of something. And even, let's say, for example, I just want to say this story, because this is an amazing story to me. The lawyer, I think he's a lawyer, the man in St. Louis, the white couple in St. Louis that came out with the guns, right?
Oh, right.
And let me just tell you, I would still, if I were still in news, I'd still be running that story, right? I was like, you guys did not milk that story well enough because there's so much in that, right? There are the people that, who was in the crowd? I need interviews with all of them. Who busted down? I want to know who busted the gate down. Go find him. I want to talk to the husband and the wife, right? I need the backstory of how they got the house, why they, it's not just there's a white couple and they came out and pulled the guns out, right? There's a whole bunch of things. White people in the audience, it's not just all black people coming through, right? There are some white kids in there too, hitting the drums, right? So for me, that story, that would have been, oh man, I would have milked it because to me, it shows that there's something new happening. It's not business as usual, right? And I heard that the person whose house it belonged to, the man in the pink shirt and no shoes, that he was helping black residents, or he was some sort of attorney where he gave services to the people that are in now the center of what's happening in terms of the country. So it's much more than what what is being put out there. But I think it's an example. Who you think in terms of the outside, that the outside is not the case, right? And I think this particular situation that we're in is exactly all of that, to the point where if you see something on the news, you may have to dig a little deeper because it may not be what they're presenting as, right?
I mean, there is a profit motive in the presentation of news. Yes. So they are going to be very careful about putting out things that are provocative, pulling out what I think is a kind of overuse of headline culture. So like big shocking words to describe something that's very nuanced and very complex. Big headlines sell papers or get ad clicks on the web, or create breaking news and dun dun dun, breaking news music comes on. So that is a challenge. Also, we have become from an educational level in the US, I don't think this is true in Europe or Asia near as much, but we've also sort of like made people impatient to learn anything. Right. So like, even if it's something as simple as I want to learn about you, that takes time. That's not like, okay, give me the answers to these 3 questions in 5 minutes and I'll know you as a person. It doesn't work like that. It takes time. It takes actual effort to sit and stay quiet while the other person shares their story. I have a chapter in the book about how we get listening wrong. And the title of the chapter is "The Ear is Mightier Than the Sword." One reason why if I had a hero that really I'm trying to base my work on, it's Mandela. Because Mandela always left people feeling heard. He may not have always done what everybody else wanted. He was not always popular with every group, obviously. But one of his approaches was, I'm going to listen first before I jump in. And that whole philosophy, that whole instinct to let me hear what the real story is before jumping in with kind of loud, overblown statements, I think is one reason why he was able to bring people together. And, he brought people together, of course, yes, after the country. But if you watch that Clint Eastwood film Invictus about the rugby team, the way he brings the people of the country together when they so desperately need it to rally around the all-white rugby team, how is that going to work? It might have thought to be foolish, unnecessary, but that film shows that when we don't just dismiss those angry people over there, or those angry people over there, or those uneducated people over there, or those uneducated people over there, if we stop just dismissing people, and instead, and this is a high bar, we all struggle with this, right? We're not all perfect at this. And anybody who's like, oh, I already do that, I'm perfect, I always just, have no biases. Yes, you do. We all do. And it's a matter of learning which biases we have, which biases we need to correct, and getting feedback to make sure we are addressing them.
With that, I'm going to let that be the last word. Robby, it was a pleasure. It's been a while since you and I have talked. I guess it's face-to-face, right? Monitor to monitor, but this is, it brought me back immediately to all of the things that we encountered while we were working at this company together. And I want to thank you.
Thank you, David,
so much for making yourself available to us. And is there anything else that you like, upcoming projects, things? We're going to put all the information in the description box, right? You guys can go and take a look. But is there anything else that you have coming down the pike, or things that you want people to know about?
Again, if they are interested in these topics, a lot of what I said today is in the Emotional Business book. And if people want to reach out to me, the best place is on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, there you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Have
David.
a great rest of your weekend.
You too.
And we will talk very soon.
Great.
Great. Take care. Bye-bye.